Crypto assets should be treated as securities by default, and the autonomous organizations that govern blockchain finance or decentralized finance DeFi projects should be granted legal status, which is both a good thing and a bad thing, depending on how you think about it. That's according to a study commissioned by lawmakers at the European Parliament that was published a little bit earlier this week. The study comes after the first substantive round of rules for the unified licensing scheme covering the whole Eurozone were approved. And if bureaucrats get their way, it looks like there are more such packages to come. Like I said, it's kind of both a good and a bad thing. And I've got a lot of thoughts about this, but Will, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Yeah, the whole MiCA conversation is interesting when you look at the U.S. versus Europe. Europe just passed this legislation, I believe, yesterday on Wednesday, and now it goes through like some preliminary stuff where it has to go into some sort of journal. I don't really know what that means, but the European Union has this journal, and once it's in the journal, it can be processed into like actual law. And then from there, it takes about 12 to 18 months for it to actually go into purpose. A lot of this stuff is sort of like the bare bones things regulators and consumers, frankly, have been wanting for a while. So stable coins, they have to have a reserve on top of them. I think there's some mining things in here. There's some wallet stuff in here as well. It's pretty basic though. They left a lot of like the juicier topics. They're going to have some contention around them, like DeFi, for later. And I think they will get to it later. But for now, they're kind of sticking to like the simpler stuff. And I think the securities thing sort of bleeds into the conversation with the U.S. In the U.S., there has been like this securities enforcement action going around where, hey, we're going to stomp on something and then decry it as a security later. A lot of the market has not loved that, obviously, and a lot of people are leaving the U.S., they're building outside the U.S., or they're excluding U.S. investors. It's a lot of capital that's moving offshore. In Europe, at least you have some sort of clarity, right? They're saying, like, these are probably all securities, treat them as securities, like, register with us, do that whole thing. I'm not sure what the European securities market looks like, can't be an expert in everything, but the fact that they do sort of have these things on the book a little bit better than the U.S. speaks to where capital could go in the future. I'll throw it to you, Zach.
Yeah, super relevant to the comments coming out of Gary Gensler and the SEC, right? Or specifically just Gary Gensler, I should say. There's no official proclamation here, but Gary Gensler is on the record saying everything but Bitcoin pretty much looks like a security. When asked directly if that involves ETH, no comment. But those are the statements that a lot of people are reacting to and wondering if it's going to get codified into law. So this was sort of an advisement, a study. This is not sort of a lawmaking body that looked into this stuff, but they are sort of amplifying some of those thoughts that U.S. regulators seem to think as well, right? If there is an issuer, if there's a somewhat readily identifiable issuer of this token, then it should kind of be treated like a securities. It should have a securities designation rather than a commodities designation. And, it seems sort of trivial, but there's all sorts of ramifications in the trading sort of infrastructure, the market structure, in terms of how these things can be compliantly listed and offered to retail investors specifically. So there is all this sort of onerous red tape that goes along and really challenges sort of the existing incumbents in the crypto exchange world who may not be able to compliantly offer their services should sort of these blanket designations be rolled out in the US or in other jurisdictions. So this is sort of the question, I think. How do we classify these things? And this certainly is a bit of fuel to the fire if you're Gary Gensler pushing for a securities designation for almost all crypto assets. Adam, I saw your hand. I got to get your response.
Yeah, let's actually go to Jen first because, like I said, I'll talk, but Jen.
I'll go super quick, Adam. I know that some European startups have been advised to register as a security even before MiCA was signed into law. Like, NFT projects, different projects have been getting that advice from their lawyers. For this story, I zeroed in on the DAO part because, I'm always just curious about how DAOs are going to operate in this crazy, crazy world. And it was interesting to me that they're looking at autonomous organizations being legal entities. I think that is so that their governance tokens can then be deemed securities and can then fall into the legal structures that already exist. I think this is probably going to present some issues for DAOs that are operating in Europe. If their governance tokens are then deemed securities, they're going to have a whole bunch of different operational things that they're going to have to figure out. And I think what we're going to see come out of this is probably some innovation into how DAO governance is managed. I think probably we're going to see DAOs move away from governance tokens, especially if they're deemed as securities. And we're going to see some new cool things that are going to actually help the DAO space move forward. Adam?
Yeah, a couple of things here. So just on kind of tagging onto the DAO point and the securities point more broadly, the real important part about whether something is considered a security or not is that securities have very, very specific rules about who can own them, how they can be bought, who can even kind of enable trading of them. And so it's less about kind of is this an investment or is it not an investment? And it's more about how compatible are those rules with existing systems, as you said, Jen. I think, again, like when you're looking at the kind of DAO question, can they operate as real companies? I really kind of doubt that they can. I think that in the current kind of way that these things work, that's just not really feasible. And it eliminates most of the advantages that you actually get from using something like a DAO or like a smart contract or really any of these other things. And so that kind of becomes the issue, which is that, sure, the rules are clear now, but now the rules basically make it so that this sector doesn't exist in the way that it does today. And all of the advantages, or at least most of the advantages that typically would come with it, get kind of thrown off to the side because you're fitting into a box it doesn't really fit into. So it has to adapt. The kind of last point that I'll make here is that when you're looking at this is really a guilty until proven innocent type of approach to the problem. And there are good reasons for that, I think. But that differentiation between, on the one side, actually decentralized things that don't have actual leaders, for them, this is kind of a death knell because there's nobody who can go and effectively argue the innocence of the thing without then looking like they are actually a centralized leader of the thing. So it's a little bit of a catch-22 to even try to prove that innocence if you are. So it's quite challenging. But Zach, I'll throw to you.
Yeah, putting the onus at the project level certainly is, I think, an interesting and probably the most salient bit of the language that's incorporated here.